Hello, ATypI 220. I hail you from the fair city of Haarlem in the Netherlands. We'll take an adventure today, which is the very eventful adventure of a variable font. I'm Reinders Folmer, and I run my type foundry, Typearture. Typearture stands for type, Arthur, and adventure, and that's sort of my approach. I tend to find out new things with type, weird things with type, and experiment with them. And I like a lot of type. I like all the fonts. I like color fonts, variable fonts, and variable color fonts. Most of all, I like experimental, expressive, conceptual typefaces. So what are those actually? Well, simply, those are typefaces which add a bit more. You can see here that you're reading the message, but the message tries to be neutral, if you can even call it neutral. What I try to do is give it a bit of an extra feeling, sort of storytelling of its own. And especially important is to give that to a user. And for that, digital types are perfect. In the past, we had Latin and wood type, we had transfers, and we had our typewriter. All of them were sort of easy to use, although some simpler than others. But the big limitations were, well, how many cabinets of type could you fit in your hanger? Or how many transfers of letter set that you have in your drawer? Or did you have a high-tech typewriter in which you could actually swap typefaces? Those things weren't very mainstream. So we were happy that we now have digital font files in which, well, people can have hundreds or thousands of typefaces on their computer and use just the one that they want. For me, it's even more important the character set, which is enclosed in these typefaces. This isn't just any script or alphabet. It can also be the additions, the extras, like special borders, iconography, the icons, or how does actually the punctuation work in relation to the type. And with those things, you can give your type a certain history, context, storytelling on its own, all wrapped up in one small font file. So, best if I think show you an example. And be aware, illustration ahead. A while ago, some years actually, I was taken by people who were taken by unicorns. This was in the Tumblr area, and all of those sort of feeds were full of these things. Airburst madness, gradients, anything to sort of showcase these animals or their magic. But what I found out was that the lettering and the typefaces used were highly lacking, or they used what was already out there on their machines, or they just used what was just popular culture, but not unicorn popular culture, well, aside from the amazing poster in the bottom right, of course. What I was thinking about was, how would you have a message from someone who feels magical? What kind of type would you choose for that? If you only add an emoji, you're not really conveying the message. What you want to do is really combine the type and, of course, the ID of this creature. What was important for me before I started sketching, drawing, creating, was that I wanted to give the users a fully usable typeface. And most of all, to make it easily accessible, so every keystroke counted. Not really weird Unicodes nobody could access without special software, just all on simple keystrokes. So I started sketching. And with those sketches, well, it went well. I learned a bit. I learned what didn't work, I learned what did work, and in the end, I came to a result. A result which was a unicorn typeface, and not just a unicorn typeface, but with all the bells and extras. So here we got it. This is the color variant, and you can see in all its shiny magic, chromatic power, it looks pretty magical. The horn is shiny, the manes are fluffy. And then of course we also have a line variant, a simpler one, because not all software programs support color fonts. You can also see on the third and fourth line that there is a version without a horn. This is the unicorn sans. But there's more to it than to the A to the Z. We also have our punctuation and our numerals. And I felt that these had to be a bit more to create the world surrounding the unicorn. So these wouldn't be made out of unicorns. These would be made out of things we relate to these creatures. Perhaps stars, rainbows, clouds. As you can see, all these elements together make the punctuations something which works with the unicorns and not just adds more and more unicorns. These elements would also be usable by the user as ornaments. So also it has this quite strong typographic backing using golden ratio and cadence spacing and Van de Graaf dimensions. It's all there, solid type design. The end result were 4 files: a color variant of the sans, line variant of the sans, and a color variant of the horn, and a line variant of the horn. But I felt these 4 files, they're all sort of in a world of their own. Isn't there a way in which we can make one world out of these? Well, thankfully, we have the technology. We can build them. And that technology is, of course, variable fonts. Variable fonts would allow us to create a typeface which includes both the horn and the sans variant, and then create everything in between. A bit like this. We have our horn at 0%, we have our horn at 100%. So at 50, it should probably be sort of halfway there. Making it work, we can see that the interpolations go very smoothly from 1 till 0 to 100. Here we see it in motion, going all smoothly. I could have added an axis, like perhaps glittering of stars, but I felt it was a bit too much. Thought it was important to focus on the unicorns and their sans version. So now we have these 2 static versions and a variable font. How do these relate? I felt that these 2 static variants were a bit different in the variable font. The variable font was more. It included like every version of the unicorn font out there. Perhaps it almost felt alive. And if it was alive, what more could there be? Could it live in a world? How would it relate to other characters? Would it perhaps go on an adventure? I thought my variable font could be a persona. So let's give our persona a face. Meet Snooze the unicorn, our variable font made flesh. Here she is currently at state 1, the horn fully retracted. You can also, of course, have the horn fully extended at axis 100. I felt, okay, now we got our axis in our variable font, our living variable font. But Shouldn't these axes relate to it in some way? Why does the horn go from 1? Why does it go to 100? I thought, well, what if she sleeps and the horn goes to 1? So whenever snoozes, the horn retracts. Then whenever snooze sneezes, the horn goes to 100. She's allergic to flowers, so that makes going to 100 not that difficult. Of course, she needs a place where she should live. We could add perhaps a forest, a castle, and some places unknown. These places unknown, let's fill them in. Let's have mountains, a glade, perhaps a waterfall, some farmsteads, hills in the distance, perhaps fields, all kinds of things which make a world reality. Let's now combine these with the things which we already had. And here we go. We have a world. The castle far in the distance, the mountains looming behind, a big river, the crystal goblet, running past, meandering down into the forest, down the Icarus waterfall. That feels like a place where a unicorn could live. But yeah, a unicorn, if it lives somewhere, she will be alone, right, Snooze? Perhaps we should give her some companions. Perhaps we can have a unicorn with long hair. Perhaps a really shiny one. Perhaps one which is a bit sleepy. So now Snooze has 3 companions. And for final adventure setting, we need, of course, an antagonist. Which, by doing, might be the idea that somewhere no unicorns were allowed. Which is handy because Snooze is both unicorn and unicorn sons. Mash all these elements together and you get a world in which Snooze can live and can go on an adventure, which is the very eventful adventure of Snooze. In this fairy tale, and also specimen, showcases the variable font together with the variable font made flesh. It mixes them. It showcases where in the story the variable font changes, for instance, its axis, and why. We, of course, introduce the world, which I've just shown. And we can start out in the beginning. Here in this forest live a lot of creatures, but especially 4 special ones. You can see that the variable initial to the left is not at 100, it's a bit lower. So Snooze has probably just sneezed or has just starting to sleep. We're going to introduce Snooze here together with the 3 companions. 3 unicorns have their horn fully on, but Snooze, you can see, her horn is fully retracted. So the variable is at 1. The initial to the left is also set at 1. And Snooze is more than it seems. So we see her without horn, and we tell why sometimes the horn pops out. Whenever she's in a field of flowers, she sneezes and the horn goes straight to 100. And we can see the initial to the left also going to that value. We also learn here that Snooze is being teased. The other unicorns are being mean to her. They say, you're just a horse. You're not a real unicorn. But these unicorns, they haven't always lived in this forest. A long time ago, they lived in the fancy Brancy castle. Not nearby, but also not too far away. And they lived there together in harmony. You can see the value at 100. The unicorns had nothing to hide. In harmony with all the inhabitants. Their manes were brushed, and they also did things in return. Until disaster struck. As one of the unicorns trotted around town and rounded the corner, bang! With its horn, it popped the balloon of the royal heir. And the royal heir started crying. And everybody thought, well, unicorns, this is your fault. If you didn't have these sharp horns, this would have never happened. And all together, the people banished the unicorns as an angry mob. Be gone and don't ever return. So that's the story so far. So we go back to Snoes, and Snoes was wandering through the forest past the waterfall. You can see her accesses at 1, shows he's currently unicorn sons. The other unicorns had been mean to her once again. You're just a horse. She trotted on and came to the edge of the forest, where she came to the signs, no unicorns allowed beyond this point. And she thought, well, let's say I'm a horse, right, with no horn. I can go on, right? So we can see our variable setting set at 1. So she's safe to go on. She left the forest and walked on and on. She thought, what if I got caught and they see I'm a unicorn? Then we'll be banished back and they will say, you got caught for a unicorn while you're actually a horse. She steeled her resolve and thought, no, I'm going and I'll show him. And onwards she went to the castle gates, where she was greeted by guards who called, "Halt, who goes there? Stop right now." But she trotted on. She thought, I'm a horse, right? I can't understand what I'm saying. And through the gates she went, thankfully with her variable setting at 1 and the initial to the left showing the same. What happens next? Well, we don't know, but it will be an adventure full of variable antics and strange happenings. But this will be to continued. This tale, this specimen, showcases how the variable font and the variable font made flash interact. This is also continued in the website, where the specimen will be shown. Here, the static specimen and the variable specimen get together. You can choose which world you want to explore, the one of the static unicorns with no in-between, or the world of Snoes, where you can explore all the greatness that the variable font can bring. So here we have an example of a variable font storytelling. What more could be done? Well, we could also make a robotic variable font and make it also a real robot. What kind of adventures would this robot go on? What would it transform into? Who would have built it? Well, besides me. I don't know yet, but this variable font made a persona, made something real. That's something I find really interesting because it extends the variable font beyond just the typeface. And it also interacts with the way you read and perhaps also use the typeface later on. If my typeface is called Snoes and I know her story, I will probably use the typeface differently than it was called Unicorn Sons and Unicorn. So with this in mind, think about it. And I hope you have enjoyed this talk. And I wish you all that you enjoy the rest of the talks and the rest of ATypI. And be on the lookout for the adventure of Snoes. Thank you.